presentation specifically on Independence Day. I'm Jim Pasley.
And I'm Marvin Schulteis.
Before we get started, I'd like to let you know that we're broadcasting from the studios at Lake TV, and our signal is accessible on Charter Cable Channel 197, also on mylaketv.com and various partnering websites. And today, I'll be discussing the events that led up to the revolution that would soon lead to the nation known as the United States of America. Then we'll hear from Marvin on some very key points to the document, known as the Declaration of Independence. We'll also be taking phone messages, so call us and let us know what Independence Day means for you and also what you think about the show. So, through the magic of television, what we're going to do here is, as you can see, I said we were at Lake TV, but in reality, here we are, we're sitting in Independence Hall. Pretty cool. So, let's start out 1764. And the way I like to teach my courses is just tell stories. So, in 1764, British Parliament passed the Sugar Act. And basically what it did is it taxed sugar. Now everybody asks themselves, they say, why would they tax sugar? They don't grow sugar in New England. Well, truth of the matter is, what we did, our number one claim to fame, is we made booze, folks. Those of you out there for 4th of July, that's how we started. We were making rum, and we needed sugar. So we brought the sugar in from the West Indies. Now, the king knew this, and so he started taxing us on sugar, something we had to have. Now, in March of 1765, British Parliament went a step further, and they passed another tax. Now, this one's kind of like a sin tax, if you will. They taxed newspapers, cards, dice, and all legal documents. In other words, again, things that we used every day. And this, again, kind of put a kink in what we were doing here. So the colonists decided, we're just going to boycott all British goods. We're not going to buy anything from those people. And guess what? It worked. Never had to fire a shot. Basically, British Parliament said the little bit of taxes you're collecting are costing us a fortune because we can't sell anything to the colonists anymore. So, lo and behold, what happens is they repealed the tax. Now, when they repealed it, the king did say, we're going to pass another law called the Declaratory Act, which just simply said, we can tax you if we want to. Now, in June of 1767, Parliament steps forward again, and they pass something called the Townshend Acts. Now, this taxed glass, lead, paper, paint, and tea. All of these things, again, are things that we couldn't make ourselves. And so, again, he's trying to figure out the best way to get in our pockets. And again, the colonists boycotted. And again, the boycotts worked. The Townshend Acts wound up being repealed in March of 1770. And the only part that they kept, just to make a point, was a small tax on tea. Now, also, at the very same time, in March of 1770, there was a snowball fight that went terribly wrong. There was a young customs officer, a British officer, standing outside the customs office there in Boston one evening, and a bunch of the fellows, the locals, had come up from the town bar, and as they walked up, they started giving this guy a hard time. We didn't like the British being there in Boston. And so they started throwing snowballs at him, and he, told them there's nothing to see here, just move on. Well, one thing led to the other. People heard the commotion out in the streets, and more people came out. And before you know it, there's several hundred people out there throwing snowballs at this poor guy. Well, now down the street, the captain of the British militia, he hears what's going on and brings down several of his soldiers. Now what they did is they formed a half circle around the young guard who was standing there, and they were telling the people to disperse. Now, one of the things they used to do, because the town, is all made out of wood, if they had a fire, what they'd do is ring the church bells. Well, now somebody came up with the idea of ringing the bells to get more people there. And now hundreds and hundreds of people poured into the streets, and when they did, sure enough, somebody hollered, fire. When that happened, here the British lowered their rifles and fired into the crowd. Now what happened is 5 colonists were killed. The first one to die was a freed West Indian slave by the name of Crispus Attucks. Now there's 2 rabble-rousers there amongst the colonists, a fellow by the name of Sam Adams and another fellow by the name of Paul Revere. These 2 guys got together, and what they decided to do was create what they termed a massacre. Now this massacre, if you will, really wasn't a massacre. It was a snowball fight gone bad. But due to the media and the promotion that came about, here it was. And now all up and down the coast, people were terrified that perhaps the British would be in their town next. Now the next 3 years are kind of a standoff, an unsettled peace, if you will, between the colonists and the British soldiers that are there. But in November of 1773, 3 British ships arrived at Boston Harbor. And guess what? They're loaded with that tea. Now the thing is what the British had tried to do is they wanted to eliminate the middleman. They were going to eliminate the wholesalers and the retailers here in the colonies and sell the tea direct to the citizens. Well, again, the colonists threw a fit, and they were bound and determined that they're not going to let them unload that tea. And so what happened is they all met at the Old South Meeting House there in Boston. It was so crowded that people couldn't get inside, and Sam Adams himself had to ride up or walk up a trellis on the outside of the building to get to the balcony. And there he jumped down to the house floor and proceeded to stir the people up and said, I, for one, am not going to let this tea be offloaded in the harbor. So with that, everybody grabbed their torches, and as they headed out the door, they reached down. There was an old wood stove, and they got some of the soot and smeared it on their faces. Over the years, this is how it came to be known as dressing up like Indians. Basically, a bunch of dirty-faced colonists is what you had. And down they go. They've got their torches in hand, and there's over 1,000 of them. It's not just a handful of Indians. They come down there, the British troops that are there, there's just a handful. They step to the side. Sam Adams and the boys went up and knocked on the first ship's cabin door and told the captain, you can either give us the keys and let us dump the tea, or suffer the consequences. He handed them the keys. They then proceeded to dump tea into the harbor. Now, folks, this is a lot of tea, and tea was expensive back then. You had to bring it all the way from India. Took them 3 hours to dump the tea in the harbor. They dumped so much tea in the harbor that they eventually had to lower the lifeboats, rake it off the decks and off away from the boat so there'd be enough room to dump more tea in the harbor. Turns out that they dumped tons of tea. Worth, in modern times, would have been worth about $3 million. Now you can imagine what the king thought about this. These rabble-rousers, these troublemakers, have dumped his tea in the harbor? I think not. Now, the king goes the first step of passing something called the Intolerable Acts. I called them the Intolerable Acts because the colonists thought they were intolerable. Now, what he does is he now closes Boston Harbor, he suspends all the local elections, and he appoints a British general as commander and governor of the Massachusetts colony. Now, the colonists are fit to be tied, and they start to stockpile arms. Now, it's the stockpiling of arms out in Concord, Massachusetts, that the British soldiers in Boston hear about. Now, everybody knows that the British soldiers are headed out eventually to get these guys. Now, none other than Paul Revere stepped forward and came up with the signal that we're so familiar with. He said, we'll hang a light up in the old church building up here in Boston, that if I hang one light, it means the British are coming by land. In other words, they're going to go south and come around, long way around by land. But they could also hop in little boats, go right across the harbor, and be there quicker. So 2 if by sea. This whole idea was made famous by the famous Longfellow poem. Now, 600 British troops come across the harbor. They came by sea, and they now hopped on the road, which led them to Lexington, and then eventually to Cambridge, where these things were being stockpiled. Now, along the way, when the British came to Lexington, they're met by 70 militiamen, colonists. These are farmers. These are not professional soldiers. They called them Minutemen because they needed to be ready to respond in a minute's notice. Well, they're off to the side of the road there at Lexington, and when the British see them, they have a force of about 600. They marched across the field and told them to disperse. Well, Captain Parker, who was in charge of the local militia, said, boys, there's no way we can fight 600 British soldiers. So he proceeds to tell them, disperse. Now, what happened next, nobody knows. Basically, a gun went off. Most people contend it was a British gun. Gun went off, panic sets in, and volleys are exchanged. A lot of people contend it was something called a flash in the pan, kind of like when you light your fireworks this weekend. You get one every now and again, you light it, and then it doesn't do anything. Those guns would do the same thing. Now, when the smoke cleared, 8 militiamen lay dead, and another 10 were wounded. Now, the British only had 1 man slightly wounded. Now, the Brits marched on to Concord and destroyed a cache of arms that indeed was there. Sam Adams and John Hancock, the ringleaders, had been warned, so they got the heck out of Dodge. Now, mission accomplished, the British headed back to Boston. Herein lies the problem. It's about 30 miles. If you were to look at a map, it's about like going from Eldon back to Jefferson City. Now, what happened is word had spread about the shooting at Lexington, and now thousands of colonists line the road on both sides all the way back to Boston. And here, what happens is we cheat. We don't play like the British. The British will line up on a field in their nice outfits with their red coat and their big target, and they'll fight any military in the world. They're not used to somebody that will sit there behind a rock and shoot them. And that's exactly what we did. We cheat. Unsportsmanlike conduct is what it was. We'd turn around, we'd shoot a man off a horse. The guy on the horse is, of course, the commanding officer, which you never did. We'd shoot you in the back, we'd ambush you, and then we'd run down the road another couple of miles and do it all over again. By the time the British made their way back to Boston, they'd lost almost 200 men. Now, the American colonists surrounded Boston, and now basically, even though the British hold it, they're captured. They're the ones stuck in the town. Now, in June 1775, the Brits made an attempt to break this siege at the famous Battle of Bunker Hill. It actually took place on a hill called Breed's Hill, but Bunker Hill will work. Now, it was a total disaster for the British because everybody wanted to get a promotion. They thought, here's my chance. So they asked for volunteers, and the Brits that signed up to go and make this landing were all officers. Well, again, when the smoke clears, they're trying to come up this hill. The colonists blasted away. 1,054 British soldiers were killed, nearly all of them officers. We wiped out a third of the officer corps of the British Army in that one battle. We lost 440. Now, that sets the stage for what's happened. It's chaos. And now we're going to have to make a decision as colonists. Do we want to go forward with our independence, or do we want to go back to the way it was? We're really to the point of no return. And on June the 7th of 1776, a year after the fighting had started, in the colonies, we had also been fighting in Canada, upstate New York, even in South Carolina, a Virginia delegate by the name of Richard Henry Lee rose in Congress in Philadelphia to propose a Declaration of Independence. Marvin, your thoughts on this?
Well, Jim, that was an excellent background, and it gives our viewers a chance to put in context the background that led to the drafting of the Declaration of Independence. And after we come back from break, we're going to get into the drafting of it, the heart of the document, and what it means to us today as Americans.
I think that's great because it is a document I think every citizen should read. So when we come back after break, Marvin will let us know all about that document.
Thank you.
here. I've been here for the last 10 years. I ran 3 shootouts in previous boats that I had. I had a 36 skater that I bought from Dave Scott. It was the old Bacardi Silver and went 202 miles an hour. And I had a 50 skater that I won my class in 3 years ago. And I just come with my friends, camaraderie, brung what you brung, have some fun. You know, we're from Detroit, so we try to get out every few weekends and go to a different state and have some fun.
We're from Omaha, Nebraska area. This is my favorite weekend all year long.
It's the bomb. That's basically what it is.
It's the biggest event of the lake.
Yeah,
it really
yeah.
is. It brings people from all over the country and even outside of the country.
Yeah, the boats are amazing. I mean, like I said, it's a spectacle.
Watching 2013
Shootout Poker Run on Lake TV.
Hello there, I'm Tommy from the Gasso. We're located up in the Gravois Arm down Soap Creek down at the end. We've been here celebrating our 17 years here now. A lot of people ask me how come we've been here 17 years. Well, there's lots of reasons. We're located in the Gravois Arm in Soap Creek down at the end. We carry 87 and 93 octane, very competitive pricing day in and day out. Along with that, we've got one of the most competitive beer package prices, t-shirts, you name it, we've got it here for your convenience. But there's many reasons why they shop here at the Gasso. One is exciting, professional help, great service. And one of the things we do that not too many people do on this lake, we donate to cystic fibrosis every year. Over the last 17 years, we've raised several $1,000s for cystic fibrosis, and so people like you that help us do that. So any support you can provide us to help cystic fibrosis, we appreciate it, and cystic fibrosis appreciate it. In addition to that, come and see Tommy. Come and see the girls. Fantastic service, fantastic place to come. Hope you guys have a great, safe, enjoyable summer. Be safe and have lots of fun.
We all love Tommy at the gas hole.
Check out our playground.
So, having told the story of the events leading up to the Declaration of Independence, let's turn to our constitutional scholar for the rest of the story. Marvin?
Well, Jim, thank you very much. And what a perfect lead-in with your story of Richard Henry Lee, who rose at the Continental Congress to propose a declaration. At that time then, following upon Lee's recommendation on June the 11th, the Continental Congress appointed what was known as the Committee of Five to draft a Declaration of Independence. And it was composed of course, Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, John Adams of Massachusetts, Ben Franklin of Pennsylvania, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, and Robert Livingston of New York. Now, they kept very little notes about their deliberations, but we do know that after sharing ideas that it fell to Jefferson, the wordsmith, the scrivener of his age, to put together the final wording of the document. It took Jefferson 17 days, and on June the 28th, Jefferson's draft was presented to the Continental Congress. Between June 28th and July 2nd, they debated the wording, and then on July 2nd, voted for independency from mother country and king, John Adams wrote home to Abigail that Americans would celebrate July 2nd in generations thereafter, because that's when the vote was taken. Actually, 2 days later, the final wording was scripted, a few tweaks to the final wording. It was announced to the American people on July 4th and sent to the printer. And here, ever after, we have referred to, we use July 4th as the birthday of the Declaration of Independence and America's birthday. So let's get into this document. And Jim, it is really an honor for me as a political science professor to be able to talk about this revered document. So let's get into the very first paragraph. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band in which which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. What we have in the first paragraph is Jefferson setting out the setting and the context of the Declaration to give the rest of the document meaning. We've really got a statement of purpose here and an affirmation of the respect to the opinions of mankind. Now, Jim, let me ask you something. In your knowledge of history, can you ever remember another nation, when separating from its mother country, that had the decency, the respect for all of the rest of the world, to sit down and write a document explaining why they were doing it? And this is unique to America. It's what's made us the exceptional nation ever since. It's class, man.
It's fascinating.
Yes, respect for the opinions of mankind.
We're the only country I know of that, you know, think about it, at the time we were all governed by kings or czars, or we had a unique situation here.
This
it's the
was
first time
unusual.
this happened, so pretty cool.
Let's now go to the first sentence of the second paragraph, which is the part of the Declaration that most Americans know about. If you ask them to quote something from the Declaration of Independence, they'll quote from this paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jim, it's this paragraph that lays the philosophical foundations of what it means to be an American. If you ever want to know what it means to be an American, you read this paragraph. Now, there's nothing new here. For all his genius, Jefferson did not invent these ideas. The first mention of natural rights under the goodness of one God, with the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, was talked about by the Greek philosophers, most particularly the Stoics. And then later, centuries later, came along Jefferson's posthumous mentor. I say posthumous because John Locke was dead 40 years already when Jefferson was born. But Jefferson was a disciple of John Locke, and Locke wrote that ordinary men are rational enough to govern themselves. They don't need to be governed by a tyrant or a king. And Locke went on to write that the primary role of government is to guarantee the natural rights of life, liberty, and property for all the citizens. Locke said that's why government exists, is to protect those rights. The next line says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. These truths of our right to our life and our liberty and our pursuit of happiness, we don't have to be taught that by some king or some Congress or some president or some teacher. They're in our nature. They're part of our humanness. They come from our intellect, from our humanity. And then he said that all men are created equal. Now, let's see what Jefferson meant by that. He knew that not all men would achieve similar wealth. He knew that all men did not have similar talents. Some were good at one thing, others were good at another. What he meant by all men are created equal, it was two precepts. Equality under the law, that regardless of your station in life, you're treated the same by the law. And moral equality, the equality of all people to run the race of life on equal terms, to start at an equal starting block with no caste system or no class system as in England to hold them back. And that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's several incredibly fundamental precepts here, that our rights are unalienable. Now, what does that mean, unalienable? They can't be taken away. They're like my arms and my legs and like the head that's attached to my body. Those can't be severed from me. Neither can life, my right to live my life, to exercise my liberty, and to pursue happiness. And second, why are they unalienable? Look at this. They're unalienable because they have been endowed by a Creator. We don't get our rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness from Congress, or from the President, or from the government, or from a tyrant, or from a king. They come from the Creator being. And since they come from the Creator, they are unalienable. We don't get those rights from mortal men. Jefferson ties our natural rights directly to our Creator God. Okay, let's move on now to the second sentence of the second paragraph. The second sentence of the second paragraph. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Two extremely illuminating ideas in this phrase, two breakthrough ideas for America. First of all, Jefferson's employment of the social contract, which he learned from John Locke, and secondly, an uniquely American definition of sovereignty, the right to govern. Let's start with the social contract. The social contract, first written by John Locke, Jefferson's mentor, in his second treatise on civil government, describes the evolutionary development of society and government. Society, Locke wrote, is a sort of a de facto contract. It's a social contract among all of us that live in society. Remember, viewer, in a state of nature, the rule was might makes right. Whoever has the biggest stick, whoever has the biggest club, whoever is the strongest can beat me over the head, take my property, take my wife, take my liberty away from me. Well, human beings didn't want to live that way, so they formed society. And they said to each other, I'll give up my big stick and my right to steal your property if you'll give up yours. And that's the social contract. Well, what happened? Some members of society weren't willing to live by that. This is probably the guy with the biggest club. He didn't want to give up his club. He's used to taking everybody else's hunting for the day. So then follows the establishment of government under Locke's view, whose sole function, the sole function of government is to enforce the social contract. That is to guarantee to all members of society that the government, the enforcer, would protect the rights to life and liberty and pursuit of happiness. And then in this amazing sentence, he says, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. That is, that power and authority come from the people. Now, this was totally uniquely American at the time. The Europeans had never heard of what we call popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty, government by the people, for the people, and of the people. The old world European model of sovereignty was that ultimate authority came from God to the king. And that was known as the divine right of kings, Professor, as you teach in your European history class. And kings ruled Europe for the whole second millennium after Christ under their divine right of kings, that they had all power and authority from God. Now, the New World, uniquely American definition of sovereignty is what Jefferson announces here, popular sovereignty, that authority and power to govern come directly from the people to their government. All right, let's go to the third sentence of the second paragraph. The third sentence of the second paragraph. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, that becomes whenever a government becomes destructive of its role to protect life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government which shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Now, this is Jefferson's famous, well-known invocation of the right of revolution, the right to revolt. In 1787, Jefferson, then living in France, wrote to his friend William Smith the following words, and I'm quoting Jefferson's letter. Quote, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure." In yet other writings, Jefferson expressed the opinion that succeeding generations would change the Constitution routinely to fit their needs and their wishes. You know, we here in America today have this idea that the Constitution should never be touched. That, my gosh, to amend the Constitution is horrendous and the Constitution is sacred. And maybe I believe that too, but Jefferson didn't. His opinion was that succeeding generations should revise things for their needs and for their wishes and wants and how they wanted to live. He strongly believed that they had a duty to throw off government that they did not want to live under. And then we strongly see this expressed just a few paragraphs later in the Declaration. Let's go to the 5th and 6th sentences of the 2nd paragraph, where he even comes off stronger with this idea of revolution. "But when a long train of abuses evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security." This sentence is the gravamen of the entire Declaration. It's the gravamen. It is the material, foundational grievance that compels the duty to revolution. Abuse by the government, abuse compels the duty to revolt. Jefferson labels King George III, and I quote, "a tyrant with a deliberate plan of, quote, injuries and oppressions to reduce the colonies to, quote, absolute despotism, which means unlimited power for the tyrant, for the king, and no rights for the people." And then following this indictment of King George, Jefferson lays out a long list of abuses, accusing the king of being, quote, unfit to be ruler of a free people. Now that long list of abuses and usurpations, as Jefferson called them, takes up half of the Declaration of Independence. It's the middle half, and we're not going to go through all that today. We just know that he lays out all the things that the American colonists could no longer live with. Let's now go to the very last paragraph of the Declaration. Before the last paragraph, we know that Jefferson, in the second to the last paragraph and the third to the last paragraph, Jefferson gets nostalgic. He looks back at what could have been. He said, if only our brothers in England would have dealt with us. If only they would have listened to our grievances, we could have avoided this. But since we can't, since this cannot be avoided, we come to the very last paragraph. The final salvo, the finale, the declaring of independency from king and country. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America. Notice the conversion of identity from colonies to states. Earlier in the Declaration, Jefferson had said these colonies. Now he talks about these states, these new nations that are about to be born. And Jim, as far as I know, this is the first formal use of the future name of our country. I can't think of any other document where United States of America was used before this.
No, this is it.
Appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. This is the third reference to God in the document. This supreme judge is a reference to the Judeo-Christian God who sits in judgment. And rectitude means the honesty, the uprightness, with no malice. We appeal to the supreme judge that what we are doing is upright and honest. In the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, once again, popular sovereignty by the authority of the people, not the authority of the Continental Congress, not the authority of any state assembly, the people, by the authority of the good people of these United States. We do solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, and they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. And finally, his petition to God. With a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, protection of our God, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. This is Jefferson's fourth reference to God in the document. This divine providence is the intervener on our behalf, the protector God, the guarantor of our security, the Judeo-Christian God.
Excellent.
And that, folks, is the best explanation I know how to give of the Declaration of Independence.
Shall we take a short break? And we'll be back.
Hello there, I'm Tommy from the Gasso. We're located up in the Gravois Arm down Soap Creek down at the end. We've been here celebrating our 17 years here now. A lot of people ask me how come we've been here 17 years. Well, there's lots of reasons. We're located in the Gravois Arm in Soap Creek down at the end. We carry 87 and 93 octane, very competitive pricing day in and day out. Along with that, we've got one of the most competitive beer package prices, t-shirts, you name it, we've got it here for your convenience. But there's many reasons why they shop here at the Gasso. One is exciting, professional help, great service. And one of the things we do that not too many people do on this lake, we donate to cystic fibrosis every year. Over the last 17 years, we've raised several $1,000s for cystic fibrosis, and so people like you that help us do that. So any support you can provide us to help cystic fibrosis, we appreciate it, and cystic fibrosis appreciate it. In addition to that, come and see Tommy. Come and see the girls. Fantastic service, fantastic place to come. Hope you guys have a great, safe, enjoyable summer. Be safe, and have lots of fun.
We all love Tommy at the gas hole.
Check out our playground and new Pirate Arcade, fun for all the Buccaneers. Welcome to Jolly Rogers, home of the famous boat bar. We're located at the 4.5 mile mark of the Gravois Arm. Jolly Rogers is a place where you can come in an open air atmosphere, enjoy some great food, cold beverages, and let the kids play in the playground or the arcade. Check out our bands every Friday and Saturday night. Our list of schedules is on our website, grubandgrog.com. Christy and I came down here 6 years ago, partnered up with Tom, and we set sail on this venture. We built the building from scratch with our own hands, and I've really enjoyed all the customers that have become friends and part of our family here at Jolly Rogers.
Aye, laddie, come out to Jolly Rogers, Grub and Grog. If you're looking to wet your whistle, try one of our incredible specialty drinks. Enjoy live music Friday through Sunday. The Jolly Rogers was voted best restaurant on the water by the Lake of the Ozarks diners. Vote on in for some grub and grog at Jolly Rogers at the 4.5 mile marker of the Gravois Arm. Aye.
Come into Jolly Rogers and celebrate your birthday pirate style with Corona, our parrot.
The most powerful, high-performance personal watercraft is from Yamaha. Introducing the new Super Vortex high-output powered wave runners. Quicker, more power, responsive handling, race-ready performance right out of the box. When it's time to get serious about performance, it's time to get a Yamaha SVHO Wave Runner.
You're a Yamaha Wave Runner dealer at the lake for over 40 years. Surdike Yamaha, Osage Beach.
The new NXT is the most accessible Mastercraft towboat ever made, starting at $50,000. $50,000? Are you freaking kidding me? For that awesome boat? That is awesome. Said awesome twice.
Throw this starting at $50,000 away a little bit.
Sorry.
Okay, now. scoot over, I'm driving.
Wake Effects, your exclusive Mastercraft boats dealer at the lake, located on Osage Beach Parkway at the Passover Road exit.
Hi, welcome back. Thanks a lot for joining us this morning. Marvin, I want to say that that was a great job you did of trying to explain that Declaration of Independence in a way that we can all truly understand it. And when you analyze it, it really does have an impact on where we are as a country today, how people look at our government, the questions that they have. You know, to me, I find it fascinating that the people that signed that thing, when they sign that document, they're signing a document that if we don't win, every one of them will probably be hanged. In fact, I think, wasn't it Ben Franklin said we should, how'd it go?
He told the lady out in front of the Independence Hall that we've created a republic, ma'am, if we can keep it.
Yeah, and it's something about if we have to hang together or we'll all hang separately.
Oh, yeah. I don't know whether Franklin said that or maybe you said that.
It might have been me as well, yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the significance of that document from a historical perspective?
Of the three documents in the American firmament, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration, it is the single seminal document, and let me say why that is. The Constitution is machinery. It tells how government should operate. The Bill of Rights, although unusual and the most unusual statement of civil liberties in the world, it's not on the same par with the Declaration, and let me tell you why I say that. Today, scholars look back at the Greek philosophers to learn what it was like in Greece and in those times. 1,000 years from now, Jim, 1,000 years from now, when historians look back to our civilization and say, what were those Americans all about? Who were they? What kind of people were they? They'll read this document.
You're right.
Because it tells everybody what it is to be an American. It is so uniquely American.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we see people flooding across our borders to come here and not the other way around. We have just a wonderful system of government. You know, as much as you hear the complaints, I challenge anybody to find a better one. I also thought that it's kind of interesting to note, a lot of people always ask me, why did John Hancock have his signature so big on that thing? And, you know, I mean, what's the deal? Well, what had happened is John Hancock, he's the money guy behind the Revolution. He's the one that financed it. He had a big shipping business there in Boston. And when the king started all these different taxes and customs and everything, what they would do is they'd come and inspect your boat and see that you'd pay the taxes. Well, they did kind of a bait and switch with him. They said, oh, we don't need to look at your boat, everything's fine, you know, we'll let you come on in. So he did that several times. And lo and behold, he thought, well, nobody's checking, so he brings in a whole boatload of wine and goods from France, and that's when they dropped the hammer on him. And when they did, they confiscated the entire boat, all the contents. I mean, he was fit to be tied. This is his best boat. And so when he signed the Declaration of Independence, he signed it as big as he could, and everybody said, why did you do that? He said, because I want King George to see my name on there.
That's exactly
so
right.
I think that's pretty humorous too.
Yes.
They've pretty well decided. And another thing to think about, it isn't everybody that was on board with this. And I'm teaching an American Revolution class right now where I tell my students, a third of the people supported King George.
There were Tories.
A third of them supported George Washington, and a third of them just said, get off my mountain, I don't want anything to do with this. But New York State itself provided more people to King George than they did to George Washington.
And that I didn't know. I learned something all the time from you, Professor.
So it's pretty interesting when you look at this, the ledge that these guys tread out on, and to come up with such a beautiful document, and to set the stage for the Constitution and where we're headed, and where they were headed as a government in the future.
You know what strikes me, Jim, and I know that the station wants, or the Lake TV wants to take questions here in a minute. What strikes me is that from the time that committee was formed on June the 11th until the official adoption of the Declaration on June 4th is less than a month. We can't even form a committee in Congress today.
You're right.
It takes a year to form a committee in Congress, and then when you form the committee, they all squabble about who ought to sit in what chair and at what place, and then they get nothing done. This whole exercise of drafting the Declaration went from June the 11th to July 4th.
It's unbelievable.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's amazing what they were able to do. I did want to make one clarification so that, well, it's not really a clarification. One of the things we needed to let you know is in your presentation you made mention of the fact that Thomas Jefferson was in France. It's not that he left here. He was in France because he and Ben Franklin and John Adams were there getting money from the king to finance the war. So they were our diplomats over there. So don't get the wrong idea.
They were our ambassadors.
I'll help from a distance. He was helping from a distance, and it really made a big difference. But that's why he was in France.
Yeah, our ambassador to France, John. Ben Franklin paid a call on the Dutch bankers to get money. Mm-hmm. So we visited a lot of capitals in Europe during that period.
It was great. You want to try, and I'll tell you what, we have the opportunity here where we can try and take some phone calls, and we'd really be interested with your questions and what 4th of July means to you.
Good morning, gentlemen. Love your show, and thanks for doing this on a holiday. Wanted to ask who someone was that has been influential during your teaching career, and why you got into history, Mr. Pasley, and politics, Mr. Schulteis. Thanks, and again, appreciate all you guys do for the Lake area.
Wow, that's a great question. Well, of all things, you're looking at somebody that waited a long time to go back to school, and of all things, I graduated from the Columbia College evening campus. Went back to school, and lo and behold, the first teacher that I had was a fellow by the name of Mike Kettler, and loved to tell stories, history stories, and I've patterned myself after him. Then when I went on to grad school, there was a fellow, Dr. Mink, and Dr. Mink, he fascinated me. He'd sit next to the desk, walk in, no notes, and it was like somebody threw a switch. He's the guy I'm trying to be like. So those two, I'd say, Kettler and Mink were probably the two biggest influence in my life. And by the way, I hated history in high school.
Well, I was just going to make a comment about that, about you. If you're a viewer who's always hated history and think that's the last place I want to be, he is known on our campus as the storytelling professor. He's known because he presents history as a story. And he's one of the most popular instructors we have, and there's a reason for it. The influence on me is I've been a political junkie all my life. I can never remember not being interested in politics. I can remember as a little boy asking my dad, what a congressman was. What do people do when they go to Congress? Well, I'm in kindergarten.
You're a strange little boy,
aren't you? Yeah, I was. And all the other kids are out shooting BB guns, and I'm asking what a congressman does. But I've always been interested in politics. I have messed with it from time to time on various campaigns, and I'm a lawyer and a political science major, so all of the above.
Great. We'll take another call.
Happy Independence Day, Lake TV. Independence Day, we need to remember all the men, women, and children who went through great hardship to deliver a country to us that we could be free from tyranny of the majority. So enjoy your freedom, folks. Thank you. Thanks, Lake TV.
Another great call, and boy, you know, from the founding of this country to today, you can't say enough about the people who have stepped forward and saw to it that this grand experiment works. In my American Revolution class, we were just talking about Valley Forge and the hardships that they endured, and they had every right to just walk away and say, look, it's not going to work. And you push that forward into every major challenge that has come to this country. It's just amazing the spirit of this country and the ability of people to step forward in times of crisis.
Absolutely.
Be it a war, 9/11, a disaster. I couldn't be prouder. There's not a better place to live.
The reason the grand experiment works and will continue to work long after we're gone, Jim, is because of the perseverance of the American people. There's no country in the world can reinvent itself like Americans can. And all this gloom and doom stuff, I get so impatient with it, because every time America comes to an impasse, we reinvent ourselves. We come out of it stronger. And so, you know, we're in a period now of political turmoil and polarization in Washington, but this is a passing thing. America will reinvent itself and be even stronger.
And that's a great point. Another call?
Hey, I'm calling about what does the 4th of July mean to me, and it kind of means to me. Think about the founders and what they were thinking, that Jefferson especially, and then Franklin and Adams, they kind of stuck their neck out for the 4th, for the Independence Day, and Adams even said, let's mark each year of independence with fireworks and a parade and just really a party. So, I mean, that's kind of what it's become, and with the blessing of the founder. That Adams would be the originator of the idea, and Jefferson continuing with it. So, yeah, I mean, just that we have freedom, and that it is marked with celebration and for good reason, and with the excitement of the celebration, because it is blessed by the founders themselves.
Absolutely. Great comments. Again, no other country in the world that I'm aware of has these documents, has this spirit for this day of our declaration. We're celebrating our country, and I know everybody kids, it's a great day to be on the lake, great day to watch a ball game, you bet. And everybody needs just to remember the reason why you have the ability to do that is because of the Declaration of Independence and the courage and the steadfastness of the people in our past that got us to where we are today.
The perseverance of the American people.
Yeah. Absolutely. Another call.
This is Keith Lucas with VFW Post 5923. What does the 4th of July mean to me? It's a day of celebration, a day to gather with friends and family and barbecue and have fireworks. It's a day of reflection and hope, to think of the events and people that have shaped our country. It's a day to take pride, to display the red, white, and blue. It's a day to remember the veterans that have died for our country. It's a day that no one is Republican or Democrat. We are all Americans. It's a day to appreciate our way of life, that we live in a country where we can live where we want to live, love who we want to love, and to be what we want to be. God bless America. United we stand.
You know, Jim, his last comment there is one of the things that Jefferson talked about in the Declaration when he talked about equality, and that is the equal opportunity for each American to be what he or she wants to be. Now, that was unknown at the time. We had a class system in Great Britain, various caste systems all over the world, but Jefferson believed that each individual had the right, the equality to be what each individual wanted to make out of their life.
And you're absolutely right. That speaks volumes because just as you said, we had the nation states of France and England, but as you traveled in an easterly direction, across Central Europe and on your way to Russia, it was like going back in time. It would, if you could go to the German states or to Austria or all the way into Russia, and you were thinking that you were in the Monty Python and the Holy Grail days. It was amazing. Do we have another call?
Question: how much did the Boston Tea Party, the beginning of the Revolutionary War, play in the dependence of the 13 colonies and our eventual signing of the Declaration of Independence? Michael from Iowa. What does today mean to me? It's the gift from God for the right of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Thanks.
Now, in today's world, that last statement you made may sound old-fashioned and even offensive to some people to say that it is a gift from God. And that's too bad, because our founding documents, clearly, the whole basis of the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is based upon the concept of a creator God.
And to answer his question about the Boston Tea Party, I think it's fascinating. Again, the individuals. Sam Adams, yes, there really was a Sam Adams besides the guy on the beer bottle, folks. Sam Adams inherited his dad's brewery and proceeded to run it into the ground.
I'm glad he did.
Yes, exactly. And, basically he was somewhat destitute, but he's a rabble-rouser. I tell my students that he's the John Belushi of the American Revolution. Just, stir everybody up. And he was the guy that did that. He got everybody together with this whole concept of dumping the tea and, quite the ringleader. And, I think what he did is he solidified a lot of people in the concept of we're not going to live under this tyrant. And you got to think about it. When they talk about no representation or no taxation without representation, we didn't want that. Think about it. We had 13 colonies. There's hundreds of people in Parliament. If they voted, it would be 300 to 13. What we wanted was our independence.
Exactly.
So, having said that, thanks for watching our 4th of July presentation, specifically the topic of Independence Day. We'd like to thank Lake TV and Columbia College for making this happen. We hope everybody has a safe and happy holiday. Be good. We'll be back.